Welcome to Podkey NFL, where today it's quarterbacks, shaky franchises, and a few real contenders. A lot of this episode comes down to one simple question. What's actually stable in the NFL right now? At quarterback, at head coach, in the front office, even in team-building philosophy. The gap between solid and chaotic feels huge. The quarterback conversation starts where it usually does, with the guys who can bend the whole league around them. Josh Allen still looks like sustained elite production. The arm, the mobility, the improved short accuracy, all of it. Even if the playoff resume still leaves people wanting a little more, and the sack numbers have climbed. Lamar Jackson keeps strengthening his case too, because the big thing with him is adaptability. He went from Greg Roman's run-heavy setup into Todd Monken's more balanced offense and still put up elite efficiency, while also doing a better job protecting his body when he runs. Patrick Mahomes is the fascinating one. The raw explosiveness dipped some in 2024, and now the conversation is less, is he great, and more. How much can roster erosion and his health chip away at the all-time version of him? A couple of the ranking debates are really about ceiling versus trust. Drake May gets talked about as the higher upside player against Joe Burrow because of the dual threat tools, but Burrow's processing and consistency still keep him planted in that top 5 neighborhood when healthy. Justin Herbert remains one of the league's best regular season passers, but the playoff sample keeps hanging there. Turnovers, rough decisions, games where the offense doesn't travel well enough, and a lot of that traces back to protection issues and not having a steady run game to lean on. Then there's the next tier where situation matters a ton. Matt Stafford at 38 can still absolutely rip deep throws and generate elite-level efficiency if his back cooperates. Trevor Lawrence may finally have a scheme that fits him better, especially in the middle of the field and off-play action. Caleb Williams cutting his sack rate that dramatically in 1 year is a huge sign of adaptation, even if you still wonder how often hero mode can keep working. C.J. Stroud stayed efficient behind a terrible line, which is impressive, though he still has the occasional mental lapse. Dak Prescott's precision gets a lot of respect, especially throwing into tiny windows, but his health and the line in front of him matter a lot, if Dallas wants to avoid the bad turnover version showing up. Jordan Love and Jared Goff feel like steadier floor quarterbacks, efficient, lower negative plays, but not necessarily the guys raising your ceiling on their own. If the quarterback rankings were about stability, the Jets are the opposite case study. The reporting and commentary around Woody Johnson paints a really hands-on ownership style, meddling in coaching decisions, creating churn, and making it hard for any long-term plan to breathe. That shows up in the football stuff too. Aaron Glenn got criticized for game management, for how things were handled publicly, and then you had this wild assistant turnover right after the season, which is usually a giant blinking sign that the building is not calm. The contrast people keep making is Kansas City, where Andy Reid and internal continuity still matter. That kind of hands-off ownership model doesn't guarantee wins, but it gives the football people room to act like football people. There was even a bigger picture governance idea floating around. Basically more owner transparency on money, spending, and salaries, with independent auditing. It sounds academic until you remember how often dysfunction starts above the coach's office. League-wide, hiring trends still lean younger, but there's room for proven veterans like Vic Fangio when teams want instant structure, and with the Jets specifically, the guess is that by 2027 or 2028, they may swing toward a defensive-minded head coach just to establish some kind of stable identity. A lot of roster-building talk came back to a pretty old-school truth. If you've got premium picks, start with the line of scrimmage. The Jets did that by stockpiling high picks and putting real resources into offensive tackles, like Olu Fashada and Armand Membu, then mixing in a freaky athlete at tight end with Kenyon Sadiq, and some safer developmental pieces on defense and at receiver. The idea there isn't instant glory. It's more like, can this become a credible 7-10 foundation year while the young core gets built correctly? There was also a strong argument for protecting mid-round picks, because that's where roster connective tissue comes from. Deep drafts reward teams that keep throwing darts instead of constantly trading those swings away. Detroit was the warning label on that point. Misses at the top. Not enough top 100 volume over the last few years. and too much reliance on aging starters can quietly drain a contender's depth, even while the headline talent still looks good. And from a value standpoint, the reminder was that premium trench players and defensive difference makers can tilt a team more than a similarly priced wide receiver. A great tackle or edge rusher changes life for everyone around him. A couple smaller roster notes fit that same practical mindset. Teams want young running backs before wear really catches up, and backup quarterbacks still live in that funny zone where they're good enough to steal a game and volatile enough to hand one away. The Giants feel like a team where the diagnosis is pretty clear. Jackson Dart's durability is a concern after all the concussion checks, and even beyond him, it's hard to ask any quarterback to thrive without a modern line and a more reliable group of pass catchers. Defensively, last year's run defense was a disaster, dead last by DVOA, and giving up explosive runs at a ridiculous rate because of missed tackles, bad angles, and poor gap discipline. A pass rush can only cover up so much if the second level is leaking. There is some optimism, though. Denard Wilson's scheme could modernize things, and with Brian Burns plus help around him, that side of the ball might become the Giants' best chance at staying competitive. The Jets, meanwhile, are easier to describe and harder to trust. The draft haul makes sense. The line should be sturdier. There are some intriguing upside athletes, and you can squint and see a tougher, deeper roster. But the organizational instability hangs over all of it. Until the ownership piece quiets down and the coaching picture settles, every good personnel move comes with a little asterisk. Philadelphia's offensive shift is one of the more interesting schematic stories. The Eagles are moving toward more under-center play action and RPO elements under Sean Mannion, trying to make life easier for Jalen Hurts and get away from being so shotgun dependent. That sounds smart in theory, but Hurts barely worked from under center last season. So the question is whether the pocket timing and anticipatory throwing adjust cleanly. The personnel additions are clearly meant to cushion that transition. Washington is doing almost the opposite kind of overhaul, especially on defense. Dan Quinn and his staff are rebuilding the front and linebacker group to create more flexibility and more run-pass conflict than the old setup had. The concern there is offense, because if Ben Johnson wants a motion-heavy under-center system, the receiving core and quarterback accuracy have to support that complexity. Dallas still looks like one of the best offenses in football if the line stays upright. But the defense has enough depth concerns, especially in the secondary and on the edge, that it could keep them a tier below the real conference heavyweights. Detroit still gets favorite treatment in the NFC North, mostly because the offense can roar back if the line health improves even a little. But the secondary is thin. The depth is shakier than people want to admit, and that's where contender status gets tested. Kansas City is in that strange zone where they've earned infinite respect, but not automatic immunity from scrutiny. The offense has become more methodical and less explosive, and if Mahomes isn't fully right, the margin shrinks fast. A more dangerous under-center run game could help, especially if they add more power to it. And one quick note on Indianapolis, the late-season collapse wasn't just about Daniel Jones getting hurt. The efficiency had already started sliding before the injury, on third down, in the red zone, and under pressure, which usually means the bigger problem is structural. A few of the most fun conversations were about how we remember football, not just how we play it. The Hall of Fame receiver backlog is getting messy because modern passing numbers have inflated everything. Reggie Wayne, Torrey Holt, Steve Smith, all of them have real cases, but there just aren't enough slots to make the process feel clean. That opened the door to bigger context questions. Do you discount production in great offenses or reward someone like Steve Smith more because he carried weaker ones? The same kind of edge case debate showed up with Darren Woodson, Marshall Yanda, and Eric Berry. There was even a practical fix suggested. A temporary class expansion, just to clear some of the logjam from this passing era wave. On a quieter note, the football book discussion was great. The New Thinking Man's Guide, Finding the Winning Edge, America's Game, Friday Night Lights, The Hidden Game of Football. These were treated like the sport's real library shelf. And the underlying point was a little melancholy. People miss deeply reported football books, the kind that feel like you got led inside the sport instead of just getting fed takes about it. One last football truth before we go. Special teams coaches may be the most wonderfully intense people in the league. The best ones mix energy, people skills, and terrifying attention to detail. And when it works, your depth players stop looking like depth players. Even the rules conversation had that same search for sanity energy, from second bye weeks and fewer Thursday games to cleaner pass interference and holding rules that don't turn every flag into a drive extender. That's the roundup for Podkey NFL. A lot of teams have talent, fewer have alignment, and that usually decides everything. Thanks for listening. This episode was generated by Podkey. Create your own at podkey.fm.